Welcome to another edition of Inside Carolina's Next Level. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's Greg Barnes in the middle. Evan Rogers joining the next level. He is severely gone next level since moving on to the big time. Still a part of Inside Carolina. And of course, Johnny T-Shirt, always the sponsor here for all these podcasts. Get your swag at Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Greg, I got to start with you first. I feel like we've done these shows a lot over the last couple years, sort of digging into the next level arena, deeper than normal, not just wins and losses or whatever. But now we're talking about the Smith Center, and it's really getting a heated debate. Let's say the debate is heating up. We won't say heated yet, but something's got to be done. I remember 40 years ago, almost, walking through Carmichael, seeing Dean Smith and Michael Jordan getting their autographs on the way to the Duke Carolina football game because the UCLA game was that weekend and it was supposed to open the new Smith Center, but it was delayed. And so Duke and Carolina ultimately opened it in January. It's been almost 40 years, Greg. It's time. It's time to do something different. Your thoughts on this process to here, and just we'll get into the weeds and the nitty gritty and get Evan in on it. Hard to believe that it's been 40 years.
Right, and it's time for there's something to be done. And this has kind of been taken off the back burner the last couple of years, but I think it's important that people understand that the Bubba Cunningham, pretty much when he first arrived at North Carolina, I guess he came in the fall of 2011. Within a year or two, he was working with firms to come up with ideas. So I think it was 2013 that we first reported that they were looking at potential options. One of those options, of course, was building a new arena in the Bowls lot. So this is not new. This is something that North Carolina has known for a long time that they needed to do. And of course, at that time, you had some of the NCAA investigation stuff going on, and UNC kind of pivoted and decided that what they needed to do and what would be a better resource for their time and money in that cloud that they were under was to really invest in the middle of campus. And so you've got the lacrosse and soccer stadiums, which are very nice now, the field hockey stadium, which is nice. Of course, the indoor practice facility for the football program. All those things really took priority. And so the D.N.E. Smith Center renovation or replacement conversation, as I said, went to the back burner. But now all those other projects were completed. And we're at a point now with rev share and NIL where not only do you have to do renovations for the Smith Center immediately, you also need to make sure you're maximizing your revenue boosters. And of course, men's basketball and football are part of that. The Blue Zone at the football facility has been just a boon financially. I know people may not like that fans from the Blue Zone go inside on hot or cold days, but financially it's been a windfall for the athletic program. And the Smith Center currently does not have really any of those options in terms of premium seating. So a lot of different facets to this, but now that Lee Roberts is chancellor, he has a real estate mind, a financial mind, and so he's looking at what's best for the university with regard to the Smith Center moving forward. And so here we are.
Just in case everybody have not read the articles, go to Inside Carolina. It's on the premium UNC Basketball message board. The articles that Greg and Evan have put together, sort of detailing the process, detailing the options, and detailing the financials of all this. And Evan, I'm gonna get you in. I mean, you had the opportunity to sit down and see all these numbers. It's interesting to see. The football facility costs whatever it costs, the new soccer stadium and all that stuff, whatever. We're talking about a significantly higher amount of money, even if renovating the Smith Center was an option. But you had an opportunity to dig into all that, just sort of break down what you've seen and your thoughts here. Renovation is always an option. Renovation is not necessarily the best financial option for sure.
Yeah, when looking at the financials surrounding all 6 options, you've got to look at obviously the upfront cost of how much the project is going to cost, but then as Greg was kind of mentioning, in this space where you have revenue sharing, you got to look at the future and the financial bring in that could come about from all these options. And yeah, these are significant projects. I mean, some in the $500 million range. One project is upwards of almost $1 billion. These are significant investments that in the long term you would expect bringing a lot of new revenue. A lot of that revenue would be generated from the possibility of those premium seat options. Like Greg had mentioned, the Smith Center doesn't have its own blue zone. It doesn't have a premium seat option. And when you think about Carolina and Carolina basketball and the brand that it has, both from a local and a national sphere, there's a lot of untapped revenue that could be brought in from having that option. I remember, I think it might have been earlier this year, the Wall Street Journal kind of came out with a piece discussing just how much a college basketball program would be on the open market. When you look at some of these programs, revenues generated, their cash flows, and it was a professor, I think, at Indiana who kind of had this algorithm that devised, what would be the most valued basketball program on the open market. And the one that he decided would have been the most valuable was UNC Basketball. And when you consider that scope on a national level, and you don't have the opportunity to have premium seats, that's where all these 6 projects really come into hand, is that it allows for the basketball program to, generate revenue, and a lot of it off of these premium seatings. Granted, you've got to pay up front and pony up a lot of money to get the project done. But in the long term, you'll really see, I guess, that return on investment, which I think they're all 6 options allow for.
Greg, when you look at it, let's run through the options a little bit. Obviously, there's some on campus. The big ones, Carolina North, off campus. Friday Center is also an option, but just sort of detail briefly each option. I mentioned renovating the Smith Center. That would create, a lot of issues that you can discuss as well. But they've done their homework, and they came up with these 6 options. If folks are watching this or listening to this and don't understand the options, Greg's going to break it down. There's some varying choices that have gotten people really talking about this.
Sure, and you have to understand, again, this goes back a dozen years now, and these are kind of the sites that were picked up on originally. And it's really just a matter of, you're trying to hit all these different options when you're looking at possibilities. And so, some of these may not be preferred options, but you're just trying to say, okay, what are some options off campus? What are some options on campus? What about where the Smith Center currently is? And so those 6, number 1 is renovation. And I think it's important to say that, when you ask Lee Roberts, why is this conversation, back in the front burner and such a hot topic? And what he will tell you, as he said numerous times over the past 6 to 9 months, is that the Smith Center needs a new roof right now. And he estimates that cost at 80 to 100 million. Apparently, currently, whenever there's a rainstorm, they have to put buckets out because the roof is leaking. And so that's something that doesn't need to be addressed 10 years from now. It needs to be addressed right now. And so one of those options, of course, is renovation. And it's very expensive when you have just the roof, but there's so many aspects of the Smith Center that need significant work. And we can dive into those. But everybody knows who's been to the Smith Center. The concourse, single concourse, is really a problem. It's incredibly tight. The bathrooms are incredibly outdated. Those need to be probably just gutted and replaced. And then, because of the massive amount of rock on the south side of the building, you don't have a full circle around or underneath the basketball facility. So you're really cramped for space beyond just the stadium bowl, and that's a problem. So there's a lot of money involved with doing a renovation. The other option at that site, of course, is to demolish the Smith Center as it currently stands and rebuild. And so that's under consideration. And then you've got a couple options on campus as well, at Odom Village, and then again at the Bowls lot, as previously mentioned. And then there are 2 options off campus. One is the Friday Center, and I think that would include kind of demolishing the Friday Center as it currently stands and replacing it. And then you have Carolina North. And if you've listened to Lee Roberts, and if you read my article with his comments on Carolina North, Lee Roberts really envisions that area to be a massive satellite campus. And so while it currently is off campus, and however long 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it may be, that's going to be part of campus. That plot of land is almost as big as the current campus. It's about 800 acres, 200 of which they've already got set in motion for sewer and water and those types of things. And that's something that is going to be a big part of the university moving forward. And so therefore, it makes sense that maybe you consider that option for an arena. And as Lee Roberts was quick to point out to me, as we sat in his office at South Building, it's roughly the same mileage from South Building to Carolina North as it is to the Smith Center. Now, of course, one direction you're walking through campus, the other direction you're walking up 86 MLK. So a little bit different scenic view as you make that stroll. But that's kind of how he's laid it out. So those are your 6 options. And I really think when you kind of look into it and you talk to people, the primary options are Carolina North and a renovation. That's my personal opinion on how this kind of looks. And I think there's a lot of dialogue and debate about which one is probably the best way to move forward.
Before we talk about that, why they're, which way is better than the other and whatnot, Evan, you wrote an article about a fan survey or a survey of a ton of people, whether it was Rams Club members, season ticket holders, single ticket holders, whoever. People were given the opportunity to speak out. I do find it interesting, and we talked off air about the numbers of respondents. I do find it interesting that people have a lot of opinions, and then when you look at the amount of surveys they send out versus the amount of surveys that come back, seems like there's a lot more people with an opinion about it than actually completed the survey. But they did get a fairly good sample size. What did you glean from those surveys? I do find some of the numbers interesting.
Yeah, the surveys were kind of part of just this big research process that UNC outsourced, and it included individual interviews with donors, also just donor focus groups that were conducted around the state. And then, as you mentioned, Tommy, just a general survey that was sent out to a wider audience. You had, single season ticket holders, just general alumni, even faculty at Carolina. Just a very broad scope of a survey. And from all of the research, I think some of the interesting, I guess, tidbits and key points when you look at it, when it came to the donors, and the donors roughly estimated around 80 donors were engaged through both the donor groups and the individual interviews. The general consensus was that they wanted a new arena to be built. That was the large majority of those who were engaged in that expressed that the Smith Center had gotten outdated. They felt that this new arena that would be a good thing for revenue potential, and also with that, the majority of that group expressed that they wanted a downsize within the Smith Center. A lot of them noted that with the Smith Center at 21,000 plus seats, it's too big to fill out all but maybe 2 or 3 games in the year, and they felt like the home court advantage could be improved with a new and smaller arena. And then when you look at the general survey, that was more sent out to kind of discuss both the current barriers of the Smith Center and then also what kind of these fans envisioned as what a new arena could have, and then also gauge some of the price sensitivity on the premium seating options, which we could get into later. When it came to the barriers and what kind of people envisioned, I think the biggest surprising one, or just not necessarily surprising, but just noteworthy, was that one of the top barriers or kind of issues that these people had surveyed with was the current location of the Smith Center and the traffic flow that you can kind of have with being on campus and kind of pigeonholed in that southern portion of campus. So all that kind of just came in to say that throughout both the general surveys and the donors, you kind of had this consensus, or not necessarily a consensus, but just a priority towards, building a new arena and having one in a different location than where the current Smith Center is at.
Greg, in your opinion, and this is a little bit off script, why is being on campus, on the Smith Center campus, or in that area so important to people? Because let's be honest, if it holds 21,000, there are 3,000 student tickets in there, if that. So you've got maybe 5,000 people on campus actually go to the game, and you've got 15,000 plus that come from out of campus. Why is it so important for people to be there on in the middle of campus when 75 to 80% of them are coming from away and have to deal with what Evan was talking about, the barriers of actually getting there?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tommy. And I've kind of scratched my head trying to figure that out. And if you just kind of read comments, whether it be on social media or on the IC message boards, um, there's there's a passionate group that really believes it's important to have it on campus for the students. Um, Apparently, for a lot of people who attended UNC, that was a very special thing for them to be able to just walk out of their dorms and walk to the basketball arena. That's a core memory, and so I get it. But as you said, when you start looking at the numbers, I mean, 40% of UNC students approximately live on campus. So that means the majority live off of campus. I lived 2 years off of campus, up 86. So I would be much closer to Carolina North than to the Smith Center where it currently is. So it's really, I think it's an individual perspective, and it really kind of just, whatever your experience was, and wherever you place your priorities is why some really want it to be on campus. And I think it's interesting that some people on the message boards who are older and can remember when the Smith Center was built, somebody said that they used to call that part of campus when the Smith Center was first built UNC Pittsburgh, because it was so far from like the middle of campus that it was a hike down there. Now, of course, 40 years later, it's still on the south side of campus, but it's much more included and kind of a core part of campus now. So time has an interesting way on how we perceive things, Tommy.
Absolutely. I remember when I was there, not quite 40 years ago, but a long time. South Campus was like, you live on South Campus. Where's that? It was just way down there. But yeah, I get it. I understand the nostalgia about it being on campus and all. And there's something to be said about people flooding the dorms to get to the arena and all that. With Carmichael right there in the middle, it really was a special thing then, because literally you walked across the street from all the central campus dorms and all. Evan, you used to be a student not too terribly long. Let me get you on the record. What's your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I was just graduated a couple months ago, but yeah. I mean, a lot of students do live off campus, and I do think it is special, especially in those early years. All UNC freshmen are required to live in dorms and on campus. It is special. It is unique to have such a prominent and massive arena within walking distance. I think it's interesting that you bring up, Tommy, that 40 years ago people envisioned South Campus as way far away, and not necessarily that this is my opinion or anything, but maybe that's what a North satellite campus could become in 40 years from now. Whereas in this current day, when people think about the possibilities of having a satellite location or an arena up so far north, you think, oh, that's so far away. Maybe we're looking back on this, if it does happen in 40 years from now, as kind of just in the same light, I guess, is what we're looking at now. I think the thing that is important to remember for all the options and just for students in general is that they are considering, if it were to be off campus, to have some sort of shuttle system or trying to make it convenient enough for students to get to and from the games. And also that in all these projections, they're projecting around 3,000 seats to go to students, which when you compare that amongst the top 20 revenue generating basketball programs in the country, we're talking Duke, Kansas, Syracuse, Illinois, etc., that would be in the top three in terms of the total student seat allotment. So I think it is showing that UNC is certainly considering all parties involved. They're not just necessarily focused about, the revenue part or the donors or the premium seating. Those are very important aspects. They also are keeping in mind, the student convenience and the student allotment, which is important because, like anyone you run into that has gone to Carolina, I mean, one of the first things that you're going to get mentioned is some sort of Carolina basketball memory. It's just kind of the gravitas that the program and the history has. So you can kind of see that UNC is certainly, weighing out all parties involved with this process.
Talking with Greg Barnes, Evan Rogers on the next level. The future of the Smith Center Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, our sponsors. They are great friends of Inside Carolina. And like I mentioned before, these articles were on Inside Carolina under the premium section. And Greg and Evan's work, you can find it if you're a premium member. Go to InsideCarolina.com and sign up for your premium subscription. It's very cheap. We're on the On3 network. And of course, you get 10% off with your Johnny T-shirt order. And they've got all the swag. They've got everything you could need. If you're going to the Smith Center to watch a basketball game, get Johnny T-shirt either online or in person with your 10% premium discount. Make the trip worth it. Greg, let me sort of ask about the elephant in the room, and that's the money to finance this stuff. You got to have the donors in lockstep because you're going to need that money. But goodness me, the Smith Center was built, what, $35 million 40 years ago, and people donated. I mean, I know people donated as little as $5,000 and got lower level seats for what they thought, I guess, was in perpetuity. It's been a long time, but now we're talking about 500, 750, $900 million. That's incredible amounts of money we're talking about. Or, I mean, heck, maybe really not, it isn't this day and age, but that's from 35 million 40 years ago to now close to $1 billion. That's insane.
It is. That's just inflation and construction costs. I mean, you look at what the Lenovo Center project where they're putting in, I think a new music venue and just another parking apparatus and just some minor things like that. And they're talking about $300 million for that. So it is expensive. And I think the fact that when you start talking about the Smith Center renovation, when that's going to be about a $500 million, kind of what's forecasted for that. That's kind of your baseline because that's your lowest option. And so from there, it's like, okay, well, how much more would it be to move sites, whether it be on campus or off campus? And then what is the turnaround in terms of the money? I do think it's important, when I sat down with Lee Roberts, I said, in terms of return on investment with this kind of thing, are we talking 25 years? Are we talking 50 years? And he just smiled and said, it's going to be a lot shorter than that. And so I think a lot of that is kind of the premium seat options. There's a lot of demand. And I know, for example, with the Blue Zone, I don't have the exact numbers, but when the Blue Zone was built, a lot of the people that came in and bought up those premium seats were people who had never had seats before at Kenan Stadium. And so there's a lot of people who are patiently waiting for the opportunity to be able to buy in and get good seats at the Smith Center. And as you said, with the way the seat licensing worked originally, I mean, if you pay $10,000, you're able to not only keep your seat for your life, but you could pass it down to your children. That is an incredible luxury to have. Nobody does that type of thing. And I think you could probably make the argument that financially that wasn't the best decision for UNC at that point in time, but that made it unique. And it's one of the reasons there's a lot of generations that have enjoyed the Smith Center. And that's why there's a lot of passion about it. There are a lot of people who do not want to give up those seat rights, which I understand. And that's a big part of this. I think there's roughly 5,000 of those licenses remaining. And so that's something that has to be worked through. There's a lot of complicated aspects of this. But the other part of the money side, and I think this is important, is yes, the basketball program and the athletic department need more money coming from premium seating, right? And then, Lee Roberts has talked about the need for, the entertainment value of having places to go before and after, and to have just unique aspects where when people come into town, if you want to host a concert there, they have places right there where they can eat and dine and have a drink afterwards and have a good time. None of that exists at the Smith Center right now. So that's part of it. But I think a bigger part is the UNC hospital. And it is constantly growing. All these hospitals are. I mean, UNC and Duke just announced, not far from where I live, a $2 billion children's hospital that's going to be one of a kind. And that is a massive investment when you're talking about $2 billion for that type of project. And that just kind of hints at the massive growth we're seeing, and that's necessary for a state where your population is exploding. And there's a lot of need for more real estate around the hospital. And I know fans are like, well, why don't you move the hospital? We got the Smith Center here. That's not understanding what we're talking about. Basketball is entertainment, right? Everything that we do, guys, is entertainment. Sports is entertainment. UNC Hospitals is a completely different thing that is about saving lives and making people's lives better. So that's a level up from anything that we're talking about today. And so because of that, uh, Lee Roberts and every other decision maker is having to say, okay, what land do we have available to us for UNC hospitals to potentially expand? So Odom Village, I know, is a part of it. But think about the Smith Center, like that whole area. If you need to branch out and build hospital buildings down that way, there's a lot of room for you to be able to do that. And so that's part of the equation as well on the financial side of things. So there's just a lot of complicated pieces involved. And that's one of the reasons that you go through this process. Is one of the reasons you have a lot of communication with boosters and with alumni and town leaders to try to figure out what is the best option moving forward for not just the university, not just the athletic department, but for the town of Chapel Hill as well.
Yeah, hospital, and especially UNC hospitals, is a little bit bigger deal than Carolina basketball. No matter where you rank Carolina basketball in the grand scheme. Um, so let's talk time frame a little bit, and we've talked money, and it's going to be a lot of money. We Greg, you mentioned about the seat licenses and all. That's been a debate for years as far as how to get the students around the court. Even in the Smith Center as it currently stands, is you had that issue. They fought that issue. I do find it interesting. When they first built the Smith Center, they kind of had suites at the top or the lower level, and they kind of took those out to add more seats in. And that's where you get your seats up there under the overhang. But Evan, time frame wise, we're talking about the roof needs fixing right now. Well, if they started building something right now, it's still going to be I would think 3 to 5 years at minimum, right? 3 years minimum to get something done, Evan. So in your research for doing all these articles, when are we talking about this even becoming a reality?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, all the projections are roughly between 3, 4 to upwards of 6 years long, and kind of just depends on the route you take. And when talking about renovations, another factor that has to be considered and has been considered is you've got the natatorium next door, the swim complex that not many people, or people may not know this, but is actually connected underground to the current Smith Center. And in these projects, whether it's the Smith Center renovation or the Smith Center replacement, that area is being used or designed to become part of a more expanded and more updated men's basketball practice facility. And so with that, kind of adding on to that timeline, it is believed that they'd have to build a new and open a new natatorium before they could start any sort of project on the Smith Center to allow the swimming and the diving programs to kind of seamlessly transition in that respect. But yeah, I mean, timeline, it's very variable. When it comes to the renovation side, there's a couple of different timelines being discussed. If you were to just move the basketball team permanently out of the Smith Center for games, it could maybe speed up the timeline a little bit more. The possibility of just playing maybe an ACC only slate in the Smith Center for a couple years during renovation could help the timeline hurry up, or the possibility of just doing renovations in the off season allows obviously a little bit longer of a timeline for the project completion, but that way you don't have to move games out of the arena. And that's kind of where the new arena options, whether it's on an on-campus or an off-campus site, kind of allow an advantage. You don't have to worry about that extra variable, and it's a massive variable. Where would you move these games in the event that the Smith Center isn't available? Well, if you're building a new arena, you don't have that option or that problem to worry about. But yeah, it's anywhere between your 4 to 5, upwards of 6 years in terms of the project timeline. But obviously those are projections, and you never know when things can come up and obviously change that throughout all the projects.
Greg, could you imagine them playing in Greensboro for 2 or 3 seasons, playing Carolina basketball, kind of like the baseball team had to go to Cary for a couple of years, or at least 1 year? Could you
Yeah,
imagine that?
I know. And during the indoor practice facility build where Navy Fields was destroyed, if you remember back, the football team, I guess it was in spring and maybe once in the fall or training camp at least, they went to Greensboro and to Charlotte to have scrimmages and those types of things. So you could have a barnstorm celebration, right, of complete seasons away. But that's a big cost. We're talking about costs on the side of building new potentially at Carolina North. Well, I mean that's a massive situation that has nothing to do with renovation in terms of having to find somewhere else to play, losing some of the money involved with game day in Chapel Hill. Uh, so that big piece of the puzzle as well is, and as Evan said, there's different options. And really what you have is that the highest disruption is the cheapest option, whereas the lowest disruption is going to be the most expensive. So those are the decisions that have to be taken into consideration. And Evan's exactly right. When you look at the site where the Smith Center currently sits, I mentioned earlier, but they had to blow so much rock out of that location back 40, 45 years ago as they were building the Smith Center, that you don't have a full bowl underneath, right? It's not easy to be able to get cargo in there. Tommy, as you know, there's not a lot of space for booster events, certainly not for the basketball team to hang out. They've done a lot of good renovations in the last 15 years or so to upgrade the suite, or the lounge and that type of stuff for the players. But that's moved media around. So the media room's kind of small. There's just not a lot of room to have what you need there. And any type of renovation, if the idea being we've got to improve this, right? I mean, that's the whole point of doing this. We have to improve everything. So everything where the natatorium is, that's got to be where the new basketball practice facility is. So all that has to change. Is not just the Smith Center itself. It's everything kind of there, I guess, to the east of where the Smith Center sits. So there's a lot of different parts involved with trying to get a renovation to work the way you need it to work.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about all the moving parts. I mean, it's not just as simple as saying, "Okay, we're going to do this." It is. It is pretty wild. What else, Evan? What are we missing? I mean, I have look. I don't have a dog in it. As far as I was a student there, it was cool to be able to walk down the hill to the Smith Center. When you were off campus, it was more difficult to get there, but you still did it as much as possible. What's left? What's left in this discussion? Because I think the pretty obvious choice for me to be go north, young man, go north and build a. One of the coolest things about Minnesota is when we went to the football game last year. I've mentioned this. They had a train that took you straight to the football stadium, but along that corridor, they had bars, restaurants, all sorts of things like that. That's what they're envisioning at Carolina North. I think they need to build a monorail or some sort of train system. I do not like the bus idea, but it just seems like an easy choice. Minus the $900 million you got to come up with to get it done. But it just seems like if you're going to use the land that Carolina has, basically free land at Horace Williams Airport, do it right, spend the money, and like you mentioned earlier, and like we started with, people will eventually come around, just like they did when the Smith Center was built, just like they did when they moved out of the tin can to Carmichael, to Woolen, and then to Carmichael. Time changes everything, and everybody evolves. But your thoughts there, Evan?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, no matter where the new arena is or ends up, as long as this program is winning and is successful and kind of carries on the tradition that obviously people way older than I can call back to, people are going to show up. People are going to go to those games no matter what. I think that's kind of a consensus that many people can agree upon. I think it is important just for context in terms of going back to the financials piece that where these projects vary in price, like you mentioned, the Carolina North upwards of, 900 million, whereas renovations maybe 500 million, and some of the other new sites are less than the 900. The variations come from the other things that have to be built besides the new arena. Roughly across all the projects, the arena projects to be at around the same costs between your 450 million dollars. It's where, maybe at some sites you have to build a new parking garage, or you have to clear out more space for parking spaces, or just general different projects depending on where the site is. That's really where the variation in the project costs come from. But I mean, when you look at all these options, I think, in the moment right now, it's a very passionate and even polarizing to an extent conversation for some people, just because you have people who maybe are ready for the satellite expansion option, and there's other people who, like we've talked about, have the generation seats in the lower bowl of the Smith Center, and it means something to them on a personal level. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, from a North Carolina perspective, and really a college athletic perspective, we are in a time of massive change from an NIL space that obviously has been in place for about 5 years now, in a revenue space. And I think what UNC has to do is find a way to position its massive national brand and massive nationally known program in the best possible way moving forward, and in a way that allows it to not only generate off its own like likeness and program recognition, but also just put itself ahead of the curve, moving into more of the modern age of college athletics. Um, if I were to have my own opinion, I kind of agree with you on timing. I think the idea of moving it north and having those new, revenue streams options through, your retail, your recreation, all these premium seats would allow for, UNC to kind of expand and build upon what it currently has. But those are all kind of the variables that, the decision makers within this process obviously are really kind of nailing down at this current moment.
Greg, I'll let you close us out. I didn't even ask, and Evan brought it up. Carolina's got to win. You got to be a successful basketball program. Has that been brought up in any discussion that you've heard? Or is that just assumed that it will happen? Because I don't know if that's an assumption you can just make. Just on, you got to have a winning program that's going to generate all of these things that they're talking about to support all of these things they're trying to do. Your thoughts on that, and close us out.
Yeah, one of the primary points in the survey that Evan's been talking about was asking what fans think in terms of what is Carolina basketball success. And it was to consistently compete for national championships. So I think that right there confirms that this is all being done with the expectation that Carolina is going to continue to be one of the top 5 or 10 programs nationally. That's the expectation. And so this gets into the interesting dynamic. I think Evan said a lot of really good things there. That was kind of a good statement that he provided. We're in this unique situation, as he pointed out, of change. And so on one side, Carolina fans want Carolina basketball to be what it's always been and be consistently, top 3 in the ACC, competing for championships, getting to the Final Four every 4 or 5 years. That's the expectation. But because of the financial windfall that has fallen upon men's basketball and football in the college ranks, you have to have money to do that now. And so as we reported back in the spring, when Carolina is spending approximately $14 million on its basketball roster, that money has to come from somewhere. And so we have this option of, okay, do you take it off campus to what will eventually be on campus at Carolina North, and know that from what the documents have told us, that the revenue opportunities there are far greater than if you just renovate at the Smith Center. You have that, which can better position you, whether UNC leaves the ACC or not. If they stay in the ACC, they're better positioned financially if they make a move off campus, likely where you can build a new arena and so on and so forth. But on the flip side, maybe you lose some of the nostalgia pieces. Maybe you lose that element of kids being able to walk out of their dorms and see the Smith Center and walk across after having a good time in the dorms before game tip, and then walk over and enjoy the game. That trade-off is where we're at, and that's the conversation of what is best financially for UNC, and then what is best in terms of preserving the past. And I think ultimately, Tommy, that question that you asked is the key part of that. Because with how the game has changed financially, if you want to honor the past and you want to continue the Carolina way and you want to continue to be one of the best programs in the country year after year, you've got to make a financial commitment, which means you've got to figure out how best to generate revenue. Right? Steve Newmark is going to be the next athletic director at North Carolina because that's an area where he thrives. Rick Bearcat was brought in as financial officer for the same reason, right? Revenue generation is the main goal right now in terms of preserving not only men's basketball and football, but making sure the other 26 sports are taken care of. That's a key component to all this. But there are people who are passionate about the Smith Center, and they really embrace the nostalgia part of it. It means something to their core basketball memories, and that is important. It's nothing to belittle. That's a key part of this because a lot of those people who were part of the fundraising for the initial Smith Center, some of those people are very big boosters right now, and so their opinion matters. And that's why they've done these surveys. That's why they continue to have these conversations to make sure that, yes, financially, this option over here may be the best. But it's not just about financials. That's a big part of it, and it's very important, but it's not the only factor. And you've got to make sure you've got enough people on board with whatever decision you have to make. And so that's why I don't think there's ever going to be a consensus opinion on this. And that's why leadership is going to have to eventually make a decision on which way they want to go. And I think that decision will probably come sooner than later in the next coming months. But we'll have to see exactly what the ultimate decision is.
Pretty much sums it up. That's Greg Barnes. That's Evan Rogers. We've been talking about the future of the Smith Center, the 6 options, the 2 most viable options, renovation or moving to Carolina North. Stay tuned to Inside Carolina. Stay tuned to Greg and Evan for their reporting on this stuff. It is a fascinating discussion when you talk about an icon that is Carolina basketball and what to do with it to keep it in the 21st century and beyond, both on a player level and on a building level. It's going to be a lot of big choices, a lot of big money spent, a lot of change ahead for North Carolina basketball. It's been Next Level, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Thanks, boys.